Hello, guys, and welcome to another episode of Tech Pips Diaspora. As usual, on this show, we bring you stories of successful tech Africans living around the world. And today, we have yet another story for you. Probably something less technical than we usually have on the show. Help me welcome my guest, Isaac. Hi, Isaac. Welcome to the show.
Hey, how's it going?
Yeah, I'm doing pretty well. Like, how is the winter in US? What part of the US actually?
Yeah, so I'm based in Atlanta, Georgia, and we typically don't have as much snow or
Mm.
cold. But over the past, I'll say 2 weeks, it has been very cold. But thankfully, things have warmed up a little, so I think it's been very nice at this point in time.
Yeah, like at least I'm happy it's not as bad as Berlin. Not that it's like the winter this year has been very favorable, I'd say so.
Nice.
Yeah. So Isaac is a customer success engineer. That's right. At Google. And yeah, I'm not gonna take that away. So Isaac, could you give a brief introduction about yourself?
Sounds good. So my name is Isaac. I am originally from Accra, Ghana, and I currently work as a customer engineer at Google Cloud. Google Cloud is Google's cloud division within the company. I moved to the US in 2018, so I was actually um, an international student at the University of Miami. So I went to college. I did high school and I did college in Ghana, but I did college for only a year and eventually moved here. And in school, I majored in computer science and minored in math. And throughout my time in college, I got to try a variety of different things. One of the things I tried was being a tutor. So I tutored all my 4 years of college. Um, I also was involved in a variety of different clubs and initiatives, some very technical, including Study and Developer Student Club within Miami's campus, sponsored by Google, as well as interning with a telecommunications API company called Twilio. So eventually, all those experiences led me to an interview opportunity in August of 2021 with Google, and I eventually got a role called the Cloud Technical Residency role, which was a 9 month residency program that eventually placed me as a customer engineer after the training. So I've been doing, I've been at Google for about 2.5 years, and I've been a customer engineer for a year and a half, and yeah, that's been my journey so far. So
Yeah, sounds amazing. I guess the natural question for me is what is a customer success engineer?
sounds good. So I always use this analogy as a customer engineer is a technical liaison within a given engagement. And typically, those engagements are sales engagements. So, in the cloud business in particular, you have different companies or individuals or startups that want to essentially buy services on the cloud.
Mm.
When people think about the cloud, they usually think about storage and storing devices, but the cloud comprises of a variety of different things. So it can include storage, data analytics, it can include compute, different services that companies will benefit from. So essentially, the cloud business allows you to purchase a unit of that computation for your particular purpose. So usually you need sellers to actually sell a lot of these services. But within those sales engagements, you always need someone technical to translate a lot of the technical jargon in between both parties, whether it's the seller's party or the buyer's party. So a customer engineer essentially is that technical liaison who does that translation and also helps enable that account where it's to make that purchasing decision. So, for example, if a startup wants to build a service on the cloud, essentially for data analytics, let's pick that for example.
Mhm.
What a customer engineer will do within those sales engagements is they would have that initial discovery call to see what does this customer want to build, what does this customer or what does this customer see itself in the next 2 months, 6 months, a
Mm.
year, and we actually can help capacity plan for those changes. So essentially, you are like a technical guide, a guardian, or consultant but you don't necessarily implement everything, but you provide that guidance for the customer to move forward. So yeah, that's kind of like the details of how the role works.
So I'm guessing the reason why like it's important, like this role has like sounds like it has a bridge between like technical and also having some sales experience, and probably the reason why the technical bit is important is yeah, most likely interacting with, like the customers are mostly like also technical people, like probably software engineers, I'm guessing, or like data engineers, people who are technical, and therefore it's easier maybe for the salespeople, for someone who speaks the same language, right, to understand what they need. Sounds like a really interesting role.
Yeah. The cool thing, and you raised that in the earlier question, is that we talk to a variety of different people. I would say the vast majority are technical, but sometimes you do have different personas. So you
Okay.
could be talking on one call to a CEO and the next call to a data scientist. So that's basically where you have to kind of like navigate between the two, because depending on the person you're talking to, it will kind of like change the way you are even like talking about a particular technology and how you are value selling. That's the best way to describe it. Because at the end of the day, you are influencing a purchasing decision. There are companies that want to spend money to build a particular service. So technical jargon can only go so far. You want to kind of like phrase things and explain things in such a way that they know what they're getting into and can understand it within their own knowledge domain. So yeah.
Yeah, I've seen like different roles spawn up, like within sometimes within different organizations, like for instance developer advocates, also developer relations. Like I'm curious, how does this differ to like a customer success engineer?
Yeah. So again, from the name like customer engineer, customer success engineer, or solution engineer, every company has the way it words that. Um, those roles are mainly focused on one-to-one customer engagements. So, for example, as a customer engineer, I would do like sales calls, like usually 30 minutes long, or emails that talk about a specific um, customer problem and solution. That's kind of like one to one. Sometimes we do one to many stuff where we go to events and we give talks. So that typically is the case. But a developer advocate is more focused, or it's more community focused. So that's kind of like
Okay.
the emphasis there, where there's a particular technology or particular stack or particular methodology that they want to educate or advocate for within the community. So when I worked at Twilio, that's one of the biggest things we would do. There was always like a huge emphasis on education and educating developers on a particular API. So that's where a developer advocate is, because essentially what their role is they are evangelizing that particular tool. So they make videos, they might actually do one-to-one events, but the emphasis is more or less focused on community engagement. Whereas a customer engineer is more directly one-to-one, because our incentives are kind of like to drive those individual businesses. An advocate is more focused on the wider audience and the wider community building. So
Yeah, interesting. So you mentioned earlier that you don't really get to implement some of these solutions. Yeah, like I'm wondering, how much technical does a person need to know? How much technical stuff, or how technical does a person need to be, like to transition to a role, or like to be in a role like this? Like, what's the balance between technical and sales? If
that's a really good question. And I feel like in my domain, I've met two different strands. So I think for a role like this, you definitely need to be technical. You need to have technical know-how of how a lot of the underlying technologies work, because you can only speak to something you've tried or know how it works, because you are speaking to audiences who need a lot of these things implemented. So that's the first thing. I do think there are customer engineers who are more sales centric, so they can talk about solutions or talk about maybe specific architectures that are more like salesy. By the end of the day, every customer is also very different, right? and every customer is coming to you for something. So the sales skills, all the technical skills, can only go so far individually. So what I've seen has helped for me is just doing that initial discovery. What does this customer want? Why are they here? Where do they want to go? And trying to come up with a solution that fits their needs. And that comes more or less with like experience as opposed to like, I know so much about something technically, or I know so much about how to sell a product. So it's a weird combination of customer empathy where you care about the person's needs, but you are also kind of like taking a lot of the technical stuff you've learned, whether about a particular technology or a stack, and trying to mesh all these together to influence again that sales decision. Or because again, the customer is dedicating their time, energy, and resources to use a particular service. So you want to make sure that they are well informed about what they are doing, but at the same time also earn your trust about that particular solution. So I will say it's a little bit of both. But the amazing thing about just being in customer engineering is that you get to grow across both fields, because a good software developer is only as good if they can sell their product, and a good salesperson is only as good if their products are good. So it's kind of like the best of both worlds in my role.
I see. And now, like, yeah, I'm also curious, like, how does it feel? Like, I want to get into your daily work. Like, how is it usually like, um, on a day-to-day basis? What's your work like?
Yeah, I give a brief glimpse into it. So, a lot of my day is typically set managing like a book of business. So, again, I said we are helping sellers. So, our sellers typically have a book of business that they manage. These book of businesses are essentially, it could be in any like CRM. CRM is a content management tool, and essentially like Salesforce or any tool. They have a list of accounts that they need to kind of like quote unquote manage. And the way we businesses will track this management is through specific quarterly metrics. So there are specific sales targets that these accounts within a book of business must meet for a sales rep or a salesperson to make profit. So my typical day would be analyzing a lot of those metrics to see how those accounts are doing in terms of spend. A typical activity within that day would be customer calls. So usually I have like 30-minute calls spread across my day where we go on to calls, whether intro calls learning about what the customer is doing and what they want to implement, or deep dive tech discovery calls. So, for example, there are times where I hop onto a call and a customer wants to do architecture review. They've designed a system, let's say a database system or like an AI system that he wants my opinion on. And we can get to explain that to them and explain the products within Google Cloud or any cloud that fits that particular mode. So that's one part of my day. A lot of those video calls will transcend to like follow-up emails or follow-up messages on Slack or Google Chat. We also do a lot of one-to-many enablements. I think you asked a question about developer advocacy. So that's one key part of being a customer engineer, is that you also want to create content that other customer engineers can use and other people in the community can use. So we do a lot of events. So occasionally I have to plan a lot of outreach stuff, either via email or via LinkedIn, where I talk about particular technology. I cite customer examples and testimonials, just mainly educating customers on everything. So I would say about 60% of my day is a lot of the customer engagement, whether it's emails, video calls, actual calls. That's very rare, but sometimes those happen. I would say another 20% is preparing for a lot of those big scale events. We typically do them once a month. My company sometimes once a quarter. And I'll say the last 20% is also enablement. I need to make sure that I'm ramping up with a lot of the technology that's going on. So I know, particularly in the realm of AI, things are changing every week or every day. So I have to make sure I'm educated and I can apply this to my engagement. So that's how things are.
Yeah. You know, curious to see if, I don't know if you are free to talk about like the compensation structure for like some of these roles. But before we get to that, like, what is usually the process for getting into a role like this in terms of job applications, what your CV should look like, what kind of past experiences you can lean on, for example, and
Yeah.
also like what is the interview process like for people that want to like apply for roles like this? What's that like?
Yeah, so I can talk about my experience. I don't think it's applicable for everyone, but it might be very similar. So when I interned with Twilio my junior year was my third year as in the US. Um, I I ended up finishing the internship, and at the very end of it, I got approached by a recruiter on LinkedIn, and it was for a particular role at Google called the Cloud Technical Residency. So essentially, this role was designed to train people to become technical sellers, because a lot of people leaving college again have a lot of the technical knowledge, but they don't have a lot of the business savvy, sales, rapport. So um, I did the interview. I did like 4 rounds of different things we're testing for. So it was very technical, from questions around how does the internet work, stuff like that, protocols, how to architect a solution, to very very sales specific questions, and including coding as well. So typically for roles like this, I will say you want to kind of frame your experiences around how you've enabled customers and what impact you've had. I always talk to people when I'm reviewing resumes of following bullet points that essentially show your impact. So let's say you were able to influence or lead a team. Is there a percentage, is there a metric that shows that you moved something forward? So that's kind of like how you would stand out in that pool of like roles. I also say I also worked as a tutor, and I also worked in a lot of roles that involve community building and community enablement. So those are things to point out to highlight, because again, the technology stack and everything is good, but you also want to be able to highlight how that impacts the community and how many people you've been able to influence. So that's another thing. And the last thing is also just make sure that your experiences align with a lot of the requirements, because again, it could be a customer engineer role, solution engineer role, but it might require 5 years of experience, and you might not have that 5 years of experience. So that's another thing to point out. And the last thing is also having relevant projects, because again, you can talk about having the customer engagement stuff, the metrics, but if there are no projects to show that you built solutions that have affected communities, then that could be something where you may be lacking. Again, projects are very, very kind of like discretionary. Depending on the type of role you're applying for, you might not need as many heavy hitting projects, but I think they differentiate you from a lot of people looking into roles like that.
Yeah, and about the project, I'm guessing you probably also want to have like some coding projects, for example, but
100%.
also some projects around, like something that should, you, like you said, customer metrics, how you're able to influence customers.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it sounds a bit, complicated to navigate around. Um, but yeah, I guess in the end, like it's all worth it, which brings me to like again the compensation structure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know usually at least one of my friends also works as a, it's also a role between sales, a hybrid role between sales and technical, but he like also implements some of these things, but more of like sometimes what the sales people need to close a sale.
Yeah.
And yeah, he explained like the compensation structure for their companies. Like you have a base, and also you have like bonuses, like the sales whenever they
Yeah.
make a sales.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious to know like, is that similar, or it depends on like company to company?
Yeah, I'll say it depends. And I think sometimes a little, just backtrack, a little reason why things are a little complex is because every company has the way it does business, and businesses vary across. Unlike a field like software engineering, where you have a lot of fixed methodologies like Agile, Scrum, like weekly or bi weekly, like check ins and everything. Sales teams have to change and adapt to different economic climates because they are making purchasing or they're influencing purchasing decisions. So customer engineering will vary across the domain and different companies will look for different things. So my advice on having both might be relevant for my role or for specific roles, but in other roles they might want more technical projects on the resume or more sales specific projects. So it varies. But in terms of compensation, I think it also varies as well.
Okay.
For the longest time when I joined as a customer engineer, I was on a company plan, so essentially I wasn't compensated for closing deals or having bonuses. There and this is something I can't really speak into, but there are other customer engineers who are on a sales plan, so where it's like they have a base salary and they are compensated for closing deals as well. Once I get to experience, I can talk more about what that looks like, but that's a position I've never been in particular, so I can't really speak into that. But yeah, depending on the firm, there might be different salary structures. I will say a lot of the salary structures are sales driven. So if you meet specific sales targets, you get compensated on those targets. But you also have scenarios like mine where it's mainly just a base salary, like a regular salary. So
Yeah, that's interesting. One thing that I caught in your introduction was that you did 1 year at KNUST
yeah.
as a computer science major, and then you left to Miami. Yeah, what was your experience in KNUST like? And also, like, I'm curious, how did you even get to that point, and what was the main decision to like leave KNUST to Miami to study?
It's a really good question. So I really enjoyed my time in KNUST. I was only there for a year, but one of the things I remember back then was just the communities focused around enabling students learn about technology. Granted, it was vastly different from what I experienced in Miami, but when I was there, I think there was Hack Lab in KNUST specifically, and some other communities that were really focused on making sure students were like enabled or like involved in like activities outside of the class. I will say that with kind of like schooling in Ghana, it does get difficult with skill because you're in classes where it's like 250 students. But I feel like I benefited from a lot of those earlier classes and a lot of early initiatives focused on technology and like hackathons and all those things that are essentially like involved in like events and stuff. I saw a lot of that in KNUST, and especially being in a part of it, being a university as a science school, you could meet people who were like-minded. My reasons for leaving, mainly I always wanted to go to school abroad for just the opportunities and just kind of like the pipeline and getting access to different sorts of information because I schooled in Ghana all my life. And I feel like going abroad would have given me or gave me more exposure to just a lot more stuff and being close to a lot of the companies I learned about growing up. So that was always the plan. Actually, when I was in KNUST, I also took the SATs, and I also prepped for it before then. So it was always kind of like a plan I had in the back of my mind that if an opportunity opened up, I will take it, and that happened. I took it. So I did a year in KNUST, and I eventually left to finish my degree here in the U.S.
Yeah, incredible. I also know, at least read from your profile, like you're also involved in a couple of projects as well, like the Share Code initiatives. And could you speak a little bit about
Yeah,
that?
yeah. So in 2017, I took part in a boot camp called Project Ice West, and the aim of this boot camp was to teach different STEM skills to Ghanaian students who were interested. It was actually done at the University of Ghana. So one of the courses we did was programming using a language called processing. So essentially, this language is a very simple. It looks like JavaScript, very very simple language. But the course was designed to take this language on mobile devices. So we could still use our computers, but we had a version that we could kind of like design games on our phones. So I did Project Access for a couple months. Ended up graduating from that course, and an idea amongst the group, and it was a foundation called Incessa Foundation, was we wanted to scale this idea to a wider audience online. So from 2018 till I'll say 2021, I was involved in some of that early pilots of taking this course that we had done virtually, no, in person and offline, online. So we had to design scripts and grade students. And it was really interesting because in 2020 we did a cohort of about 1,000 students, and with that kind of skill, we had to literally design scripts to grade students' assignments because the few of us couldn't grade all of those things. So I was pretty much involved in that community, and it really helped me see how to scale, like, or how to see how products grow with skill. Because we got to see the genesis of having 20 students in like 2017 to like 100 in like 2018, 2019 to about 1,000 students across Africa in 2020. And it was cool because we had about 700 students who actually finished the program. And for an online course, that was really impressive. So definitely a lot of learning from that. I feel like also being a tutor in college, I also always developed that empathy for a lot of the struggle students were going through, especially doing an online course in Africa during COVID, for a lot of students. But it was really nice to see how that materialized. And I know the SWAT code team, or SIA code team, is making more strides now with a lot of AI initiatives. So it's pivoted to be more of like an AI focused enablement, which has been nice. But yeah, we saw the genesis of a lot of that in person and also virtual work.
That's very impressive. Like, yeah, it reminds me of also my time during teaching, and it was an in-person boot camp as well. And then COVID hit, so making that adjustment, you had to like think about, solutions very quickly, how to
Yeah.
continue the classes, and how do you handle people being online and keeping the engagements going, and like grading and stuff. So
Hmm.
yeah, it's also very interesting to see like you guys had different approaches of implementing the same things, and glad to hear that it's still running
Yeah.
even now. So that's also very, yeah, inspiring, I'd say. Yeah, were there any particular challenges that you faced, like from Ghana? Obviously, you moved to the US, which is a different continent, also a new country.
Yeah.
You probably had to adapt to like a lot of different things, and
Yeah.
school and also like work. Yeah, like I'm curious, were there any challenges that you had to navigate?
Yeah. I will say one of the biggest challenges, well, I'll speak from when I was in Ghana to when I transitioned here. Is like in Ghana, a lot of the concepts, like Ghana is very like quote unquote chill and poor. So they're learning a lot of concepts that you want to kind of like um, provide answers to
Yeah.
the exam. So a lot of that kind of learning is really promoted, where it's like you want to memorize enough to be able to do on the exams. So that was kind of like, I think it's an okay framework, but what ends up happening is once you transition or you want to implement, you're not really um, given the frameworks to implement stuff on your own, because everything is like, as long as I memorize this, I'll get the answer. So that was initially a challenge, especially when I moved to the US, where it's like, fine, you can still be okay with memorizing, but you're actually going to work on projects that involve actually collaborating and talking to people. I also feel like maybe it wasn't as encouraged as much when I was younger or growing up, but those people skills, I think or in my experience, those are not as emphasized until I came to the US, where it's like you have to talk to people and talk about what you are doing, or talking about yourself, and how that relates to the work you're doing. So those are things I had to work on. And one of the biggest things was definitely culture shock, because when I went to school in Miami, it was the first time that I was in an environment where most people weren't like Ghanaian, first of all. And you had different people from different cultural contexts, different worldviews, different ways of seeing the world. So getting used to that was, I would say, definitely challenging at times, especially being in an environment where you have to learn different things, and even with how people talk and how people interact, it was very different. But I think what really helped me, and I think what still helps me today, is just being around community who is supportive of you. So I had a lot of friends. I had a lot of like um, teachers, professors, advisors who kind of like provided the guidance in
Mm.
those moments. So that went a long way to making sure a lot of those challenges weren't too detrimental. So yeah, I would say culture shock was definitely the height of everything over my couple of years, and also being again immigrants in the U.S., you are competing against a lot of people who are looking for jobs,
Mm.
and with the U.S. system and the way immigration works, you want to be in a job that sponsors
Mm-hmm.
your internship or job. So that was definitely a hurdle for a while. One of the biggest reasons why it took me a long time to even get an internship was mainly getting sponsorship to intern. But eventually it worked out in my scenario. So yeah, those were kind of like the unique ones I faced. I definitely um, have learned a lot from them.
Yeah, that's it's very impressive. Like I can imagine, like it's usually it sounds rosy, right? When you're talking about it now, and other people might think, oh, going to the US or something, it's always that smooth.
Yeah,
But again, like, the kind of challenges you have to navigate to get to this point, sometimes it's, underestimated. And yeah, it's good to hear, yeah, you're able to climb that hurdle.
yep.
So, yeah, what would you say to, people that, want to, let's say, like, also become a customer success engineer at a company like Google? Yeah, for people that are already in other roles that are considering like transitioning, or like for
Yeah,
someone that is starting afresh, like,
yeah. Um, So I'll start from just the beginning. I think, especially in this age where you have a lot of like quote unquote hysteria around like AI replacing
mm,
jobs, job changes, layoffs, government changes, I think people, or one thing I would say to people is that you want to kind of like try to get as much like skills in
mm,
different things. Because I feel, and this happened to me when I moved to the US. I came in an era where people would post online like a day in the life of a software engineer, or a day in the life of a project manager, and I'm like, those are cool, those are nice videos, but remember that the job markets are hiring people who have specific skills. So those skill sets or skill targets might change depending on how the economy changes or how business need changes. So that's one thing I would say is like you want to kind of like get a broad range of skills, not necessarily like I want to learn one programming language or I want to know how to talk like this, but there are different things you want to be able to pick up. And I think the value in school is that it gives you the knowledge, the ability to learn different things. So I would say try to get as many marketable skills. So whether it's being able to talk to people, being able to explain technical concepts to different audiences, being able to implement a technology or build or program to solve a business use case, being able to understand business problems, because those will kind of like take you a long way, even if you grow deeply technical. I've learned this principle where it's like you can also do stuff in like focus bursts. So um, I feel like sometimes when we try to pursue skills, and this happens to me a lot, it's like we try to do a lot at the same time. But maybe dedicating like 2 weeks, 3 weeks, honing on a particular thing, or even a month. Like maybe this month I'm going to learn this particular like JavaScript or Python framework. The next month I'm going to focus on maybe packaging that framework to a particular audience, and the next month I'll focus on what does it mean to value sell a framework like this. So I think just kind of like in every experience you have, whether it's in school or in a career, focusing on skill building can take you a long way. For example, my case, I didn't know that being a tutor would help me so much in customer empathy. And that's a skill like I indirectly grew because I was in a tutoring environment. So I'll say that's the first thing. Second thing is also to be prepared. Um, I feel like I lost a lot of opportunities because either I wasn't prepared or I entered to them like in a lackluster manner. So if you have LinkedIn or a resume, make sure you have just details to show what you are doing, talking about what you are doing online or on LinkedIn. One part of my story that I don't really or haven't really talked about a lot is that during my years in college, I would always like update my LinkedIn to show some of the classes I had taken, some of the things I was doing, just being actively involved, even when it didn't have a lot of the clicks and the hype back then. Just creating that muscle and developing that skill of like personal branding and personal building. I follow people on LinkedIn who did that and kind of like try to replicate a lot of the stuff they did. So being prepared, having the skill, and I think the last thing is also putting yourself out there. I feel like a lot of people shoot themselves in the foot by not actually applying for opportunities. But I feel like you want to build that muscle of like going for a lot of those opportunities, and it doesn't necessarily mean always applying to jobs in mass, but it could be different things. Like in the US specifically, we have a lot of conferences, a lot of summits where people of particular careers go. So putting yourself out there is helpful because you end up putting yourself in communities of people that can help you reach those places. And the last thing is you also can't do it alone. You need people around a support system that can help you reach those places, that can help you hone those skills, that can help you be prepared. And I feel like community is very, very important and very emphasized, especially when you have to be in a field or a career where you might be one of the only people or the only minority involved. So
Yeah, that's really invaluable advice. Thanks a lot for um, that, and also thanks a lot for making the time to join us on the show. I'm sure like there might be people that would be interested to connect with you or to reach out with you. Yeah, how can people reach out to you? Or are you okay with people reaching out to you on LinkedIn, for example, or emailing you?
yes, and thanks a lot for having me as well. So I'll share my LinkedIn. It should be in the show notes. That's kind of like my primary way of communicating.
Okay.
Usually post a lot about a lot of the initiatives within Google Cloud, but there are also a lot of events we have, both abroad and also back home that I'll be sharing for people who are interested in finding those communities. And yeah, that's kind of like how I would love to contribute. Also thinking of ways of kind of like doing more to enable more people who are interested in fields like that. So if you have any questions or if any top of minds, LinkedIn will be the best place.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Thanks a lot for um, joining us, Isaac. And
Thank you.
yeah, good luck out there.
Awesome. Thank you so much.